So my idea of where we are today is that we now have proceeded for a couple of recordings, recording narratives, memories in different pockets and different kind of headings of chapters, shall we say. And when I chatted to you yesterday, I had the impression that we were going for the easy bits first, and that perhaps the bit that we need to get to now is all about the real courage. Remember, we started with a hero's journey right in the beginning, and sometimes the hero comes to a certain threshold and then it stops. It's either stopped by the threshold guardians, and the question is begged, are you sure you want to go here? Are you sure you want to go through this threshold? We can assure you on the other side, there's a lot to learn and a lot of wisdom to be gained. But are you sure that you want to go through this? So there's a bit of that. The threshold, archetypal threshold guardians, making sure that you feel ready for what is now to come. And then the other part is, of course, our ego. The ego structure that wants to keep us safe within its own containment and boundaries. And it would rather give an impulse of fear or resistance than to encourage. And so that, with a little bit of a background, my question is, what is there that makes you a little bit uncomfortable about your life story that you think we in any event should approach?
When you speak like, are you sure you want to go through this threshold? This is a question I often ask my clients when I see in a constellation that there is a big trauma coming up or information coming up that sometimes may be big for a client to face. And can the client face it? And when is the time for the client to face it? So when you're asking this question, it reminds me asking my clients exactly this question. And so when I ask my clients this question, I'm acknowledging to them that I'm here to walk this step with them. And I also acknowledge that this is not something that is always easy to work through and go through. So, and the topic we are approaching today is not an easy topic for anybody. So, and it's a topic that we want to rather ignore. It's a topic that we don't really want to acknowledge and speak about because there are so many elements to this topic. And we need to acknowledge all the different elements to this particular topic. And what I shared with you is the one topic that I have been sort of avoiding up to this point is sexual abuse. And then I asked myself, why do you want to avoid this sexual abuse topic? What is it that you don't want to acknowledge? What is it that you don't want to go through? And the fact is, it's already happened. So, and this is the same with any abuse, with any trauma. It's already happened. What's the point in revisiting it? And with any trauma, with any abuse, acknowledging that it happened is step number one. And often there is this, I don't want to acknowledge that it happened, because if that happened, who am I? And there is also this amount of shame that goes with it. And the question I'm asking myself, whose shame is it? Whom are we protecting when we don't want to go into this particular topic? And that's basically what we're sitting here today.
So a thought that comes up, as you say, when you say it's behind. then what's really beautiful to work with is the timelining process in neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, because you stand in a certain point which you then imagine as your current moment, your current presence. But as you describe the trauma, it is behind your back. Now, the big question in this field, always, especially amongst spiritual facilitators that are in favor of spiritual bypassing, is to ask the question, why do you want to go back to history? The history already happened. You're not there, you're here. What is it that you want to go and find there? How would you respond to those people that speak like that?
So the incident happened, or the incidents happened, the trauma has happened. But what is in the here and the now? And what has stayed because of that incident? And what has stayed is the shame. The shame is still in the here and the now. So how can I address the shame without addressing the core incident? So that's the real question we need to look at. So I'll share my story. From what I have shared so far, I am in a pattern of abuse. Abuse from my stepfather, although I recognize that it was his wounds that caused what we today would call abuse, which was, in his love language, tough love. So there is a fine line between abuse and tough love. I get that. But when the child is only used to basically negative reinforcement of everything that happens, then the abuse that I experienced in the convent, which was a lot of mental emotional abuse. So there is the physical abuse, there's the mental emotional abuse, and that's the norm. And I want to look at myself as the little girl with, that's the norm. So when that is the norm, the child has a huge desire, and I'm talking about my inner child that has a huge desire for love, for belonging, for being held, for having a different experience. And maybe challenging that norm. So when somebody then comes into the child's life that gives the child attention, that gives the child validation, that gives the child a different information, the child gravitates to that information. So the first incident was a family member. It was an uncle that came to visit the family, and he started making these very beautiful affirmations and seeing a girl that is, is attractive, where she doesn't feel attractive, where she feels ugly. And it's almost like gravitating towards a different experience. And that, understanding that today allows me to understand why the child did it. Because often in abuse situations, the child will feel guilty for it happening. And yes, I did feel guilty. And then that guilt brought the shame. So there's a lot of different elements. First of all, he is a trusted member in the family that comes into the family. He is a family member. So the child doesn't know any different, that parents are not safe at the best of times. So the child, who does the child share this new information with? Because it's new information. And the child does not see it necessarily as wrong. The child sees it as validating. And then then the child is in a situation with, I'm being validated, but then there is that slight trigger where the request is made, this stays between us.
Yes.
We do
It
not
must be a
share
secret. Must
We do
stay a
not
secret.
share this. And that's where the child gets uncertain.
Mm.
The fact that she can't share it out of her own accord is one thing. The fact that she's asked to keep quiet is another situation. So in my case, I took that as a warning, and then I kept my distance from there onwards, because
Right.
I've already, now the shame comes. Why do we need to keep this quiet? What's wrong here? And now comes the guilt. Why do we have to keep it quiet? This is a secret. So the guilt then also comes in with this. So that is one incident that is very clear in my mind. And then another incident is then again, this particular family lives with my parents for a holiday. It's my older cousin, and and he comes in and out. In fact, he lived in our house for a while he was studying. So he is now, again, he's a trusted member in the family. Our family has an obligation towards him. He's an older cousin. He's come to live with us so that he has a board and accommodation. So he's almost like he's seen as the brother in the household. So every time the parents are out, there is this, we are alone, and then there is this attention and this. But this time I am almost like, it gets into a different space, and it gets into a space of rape. And the parents are not there. There is nobody around. So the child, in this case, feels helpless, has not agreed to this because he is my cousin. And by this time, I realized this is not good for me. But again, who do I speak to? Because he is in our house for a reason, and he is there because he is safe. Brothers are safe, cousins are safe. So now I have another unsafe element in the house, and I cannot speak about it to nobody.
Yeah.
And that brings a lot of shame, because it doesn't feel good. It's not right. And he is stronger than me. He is more powerful than me, but I can go nowhere. I can not hide myself to get away from him. And so my behavior becomes odd. Because my behavior becomes odd, I'm wrong, because my behavior becomes odd. And so there is, again, the same experience as in the convent. You are the one who does something wrong. Your behavior is odd, yet I cannot speak about it, because I do not trust that my parents would listen. And also, I need to protect their relationship, because it is bigger than me. And who am I to argue with what the adults have decided? So there is this big dilemma in this type of situation.
So can we also describe it as the classical double bind?
Okay, just explain the double bind for those who don't understand.
Yeah, the double bind in a sense that you have a loyalty to keep your parents safe, to keep, because they are bigger than you, but you also have a kind of a loyalty to self, that you feel unsafe and you want to do something about it. But it's like you are between the rock and a hard place. You actually cannot move anywhere, and you feel stuck.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And not only do you feel stuck, it is a situation that there's too many loyalties going on, and then also in the systemic work, now we're looking at your first love. And this recollection of first love is not, shall I say, a safe recollection of first love. But let's look what this does for future relationships.
Mm.
So there is this, once my cousin's out of the house, I'm safe again, but my relationships are no longer safe from there onwards. It is There's always this barrier between what is love, what is lust, what is the next step. And that insecurity in intimacy is then something. So again, we have the situation where this is an element that happened, but what goes forward is a behavior pattern that affects all other relationships.
Yeah. So I think that's worth unpacking in more detail, the going forward part. But if we just go one or two steps back, if we label it as what is the anatomy of abuse, it's almost, if I listen to the story, it's almost like within you, the subject, there's this need for intimacy. There's this need for belonging. There's this need for recognition, for receiving a message to hear you are okay, you are beautiful, you are loved. So there's this inner yearning to hear these impulses from the safety of the family system. And yet you have a very complicated head start because you're an adopted child. You actually don't belong. And that must sit in the subconscious, even if you don't really know it consciously. Must sit in the subconscious. And then the next step of the anatomy of the seduction or the abuse is that he says alluring things to you. He says beautiful things to you. He makes you feel as if you can trust him. There are expressions that you hear that makes you feel attracted, but then at the same time, it has to be kept a secret. So it must be wrong. So again, it's this absolute bipolar kind of impulses that hits the young subconscious mind, and confusion reigns.
And the thing is, the confusion is already, I'm always wrong anyway. And I have no trust in my own judgment. Am I right, or can I trust that this is not okay? But then what is okay and what's not okay? So it's the thing is, it's just another form of abuse in a sense. And then that's part of the norm. So why would other abuse be not okay and this be okay? So, or other abuse be okay and this not be okay? So because abuse is the norm, this just becomes another pattern of the norm. It is okay. I don't have validation anyway. So especially with my cousin, it was a case of you are nothing anyway. So nobody will hear you, nobody will listen to you. And but there's also the realization that this is not part of the norm that I want to have. But then what becomes the norm is the insecurity in the relationships with any other future potential partner. There's then also, it sets a stage of if there is a good feedback, then that's dangerous, because my first good feedback became dangerous. So do I trust positive feedback from anybody? Because that's dangerous. So then the partnerships go into what is the norm, because I know how to handle the norm. I know how to survive the norm. But when something is good, it gets like, that's dangerous. Can't believe that. I can't believe that somebody could be really good to me or really have a positive relationship with me.
So healthy flirtation is dangerous.
Yes.
is a
Absolutely.
signal that you have to be careful.
Yes. Becomes a warning signal.
Yeah.
So that throws a positive relationship into a dangerous light.
Yeah.
So if I then go into looking at my relationships, the men that I felt attracted to, it was a case of carrying on with the norm. Nothing new.
What does that mean in practical terms? Do you keep them at a distance?
I keep good feedback at a distance because the norm, the abuse, feels safe. I can deal with it. So that is a safer relationship. And it was like that until I realized, and that was, I was in my mid-40s when I realized that this is not healthy. By this time, you're a mother, you have children, and you realize that you yourself are in relationships that are not healthy, and therefore also you are not healthy.
So a beautiful moment to just recap systemic work. So we describe it as a triangle. I think you and I have gone through this before. At the top of the triangle, we have events that are happening. If we have more and more of these events, it's almost like these triangles perpetuate itself. And then we discover a certain pattern at a secondary level of the events. This also happens, and then this happened again, and this happened again. So there must be a pattern. Then at the bottom level of the triangle, there's the structural. It's the structural that keeps these patterns in place so that the patterns don't change. And my question now is, when you were in your 40s and you realized, you came to that realization, was it also in the context of going to the structural level to make the changes so the patterns can stop happening?
So for me, it was quite an interesting intervention. For me, it was, I was in a very, very successful job as a financial advisor at that time. I was earning a good income, so I felt like I was trying to make a success in my life, and I always wanted to make some more other success, adding more income into our family, because I thought that was, was important. At the same time, I was having difficulties with a very difficult teenager in my household, or in our household, in the family household. And I was evaluated because in the financial world, in this company, we were evaluated for just to see where our strengths were, where our weaknesses were, and it was a psychological evaluation. And after this, after our initial evaluation, the psychologist actually pulled me aside, and because he realized that my work was suffering because I had struggles at home. Now, for me, having struggles is the norm. So for me, there is no issue. It's you just have to work through it. You have to get through it. The main aim, you have to make it work. You have to be successful. So the focus was on me driving success to just get above this being put down. It was almost like my way of finding a validation for myself in getting successful in a work situation. And this psychologist pulled me aside, and he pointed out to me, do you realize that you are in an abusive relationship? And it was like, that's my norm. And it was him explaining to me that what I was experiencing was not the norm.
Mm. So when you realized that, how did you take the next step to resolve this?
Well, I had no way out. It was a case of I had no way out. And then obviously what happened then was, because I'm now aware of it, and I was surrounded by a lot of male colleagues who were quite supportive of me. But obviously with that support, the situation at home got more intense, and it got to be a point where I couldn't keep it safe anymore. I didn't feel safe. I couldn't keep the safety, and we went through a very, very tumultuous time at that time.
Mm. And constellations, at what point did that play a role to help you to a deeper understanding?
So this was I only started with constellations a couple of years after that. So I was what actually happened was that my ex-husband didn't allow me to continue in with my work, because obviously that now this is a threat to him. There are people that telling her things are not okay, and so obviously our family life is now threatened by an outside influence. So I had to give up my work there. And that's after that, a couple of years, I tried something, I did something else. And then after that, I had this very angry letter to God, and I said to God, you need to take me. You know who I am. You know my strengths. You know my weaknesses. Place me where I need to be, that I am going to make a difference in this world. And that is how I came across studying for traumatology, which is then where after that I met with the family constellation, and decided that is when this is going to be my way forward in life. For me, it was the opening of studying. I had no clue what trauma really was when I started studying for traumatology. I did not realize how traumatized I was when I started studying. And for me, it was, I did not realize that what I had experienced from the time of a little girl was actually trauma. For me, trauma were big events. For me, traumas were big accidents, or I did a lot of work in crime-related trauma. So that was easier to understand. To get to the point where I could fully embrace my own trauma took quite a few years. To embrace that, first of all, that is the truth, because the denial pattern then obviously becomes a lot bigger and takes over.
So given the conversation we had earlier on about abuse and the patterns that happened, if I now would ask you, I hope it's not unfair, if I would ask you an elevator pitch in the form of a question, how would I recognize that I was traumatized in my youth, in my children years? What would you just say as an elevator pitch? How do we recognize trauma?
We don't. That's the problem. And this is the difficulty, is if it were not for the interventions, I would not have known. And so if I look at addictions, addicts do not recognize that they are addicts. For them, that's their way, that's their thinking, that's their pattern. So I'm not saying that trauma is an addiction. It is just that you don't know. Unless there is an intervention, and understand that an intervention throws every belief system, every behavior pattern, every structure that you built to be safe in life, throws that out completely. And so you are naked. You have nothing left. Everything that you knew on how to survive no longer matters. because you can't carry on with the survival of the trauma patterns.
So are we saying, because this is quite a moment, are we saying that trauma is so deeply interwoven into our conditioning process that we actually don't even see it and feel it?
I think so, because we make the world we live in our norm.
Mm.
So trauma is a norm status until it changes.
Mm.
And if we look in family constellations, so let's go into family constellations. We deal a lot with generational trauma. So trauma is a norm in our generational patterns. So if we look at that, we are now, for the first time in this, in the last century, we started to realize that the trauma patterns that we are so accustomed to need to change. We are now acknowledging that abuse is abuse and is not a love language. We are now learning to acknowledge that incest is not a love language. Here's one of the classics that I've come across with clients, and not just one client. I did not realize this, but especially in certain communities, either the father or the eldest brother see it as their duty to break in the girls. And I'm using this word break in.
Mm.
And when we look at it, that is, shall I say, a tradition that they are proud of. So when the brother or the father becomes the first lover in a family, that is like, this is our duty, and this woman then struggles with intimacy with her husband, it becomes a problem. Especially with the one couple that I worked with, and this is generally with men, that they feel that somebody has stolen something from them, the future partner, by somebody else. And so they're never the number one. And that creates a problem also in the relationship, no matter how big the love is.
Yeah. Yeah, another classical example of how the purity and the yearning for intimacy then comes crashing down.
Yes. I had a very classic case. And this is also something that I did not understand. Where this young girl comes to me because she's found somebody that she is in love with and wants to get married, and her father refuses her this relationship. So that's how the session starts. As we go on in the session, what really is the situation is this father, a very prominent member in his community, has made her his woman from the age of, I think it was 11 or 12. She's now 21.
Wow. It's like a young child concubine.
Yes. So I asked for a session with the father because he won't release her, because then he has to release her to another man, and he's not ready to do that. And what is interesting is the mother is aware of this. So I speak with the father, and he says to me, I love her so much, I cannot let her go. And you look at this and you think, what is really going on here? And so what's happened is the wife, they have a difficulty, husband and wife have a difficulty, and he has certain needs, so she agrees for her daughter to take her place. So it stays in the family. So this is stuff that's hard to digest. But this is stuff that does happen. We keep it in the family. And that's also in certain families. We are prominent. I'm a prominent man. I cannot be seen to have an affair. I do not want to leave my marriage. Or the wife says, you know what, you stay in this marriage because there's obviously financial situations, especially if we talk about at least 50 years ago. I mean, there's even today, there's financial implications for this type of thing to be handled. And so it was for me an understanding that when I don't see, and he did not see that his act was not an act of love, but an act of abuse towards his child. So we need to talk about these subjects because they are real and they do happen.
Classical toxic entanglements in family systems that are hidden and kept secret, with huge impact on the lives of young people.
Yeah, I was lucky in that situation that I then also got to speak to the future to the future husband, and he needed to be aware why his wife or why his fiancée at that stage was reluctant for intimacy, because he could never complete the intimacy in the same way as a father could. Remember that the father is now her first lover, and this is not a just once off. He has been her lover for as long as she has known intimacy.
So this, curiously, was this one-on-one constellation work, or was
No,
this?
it was even before I did constellation work. It was part of my program. Yeah.
Right. So in a classical constellation floor work, one would then set up the father, the lover, and the daughter, and perhaps also the mother.
The mother is very important, because what is the agreement for the mother to do that? And what I have seen in constellations, that the mother at one stage was that little girl.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
So the pattern,
the pattern of compromise
to the next.
Yeah. The pattern of compromise is passed on.
Yes.
Yeah. It's almost, in this, even now in this conversation, I have a sense that, and often in trauma work, we say, if we hit a trauma spot, go slow. And I have that sense in this conversation too, that this is not a conversation where we can see how much we can pack in. This is really a conversation where we need to go a bit slower.
So what we do in family constellations, so in all scriptures, the only reason why you're allowed to leave a marriage, or where a marriage breaks up, is when there is a third partner that enters the marriage. So a third partner is normally somebody that is outside. So if there's an affair, if we call it an affair, then it is with that, there is a permission given to dissolve the marriage. It's an accepted permission to dissolve the marriage.
Mm.
From
So the bond between the father and the daughter is then dissolved formally.
No,
in the
we're
constellation.
not talking about the daughter. We're talking about an affair. We're talking about an external person coming in.
Okay.
That is why we keep it in the family, because nobody knows. Do you understand?
Yeah,
An
I
affair
see. Yeah.
is exposed. It's something that's coming in from the outside. So that is why we keep it in the family. So that is how incest is kept in the family.
Right.
What we have learned, and what Bert Hellinger says, is that once there is a new partnership taken, that new partnership dissolves the old partnership. And that's really along the lines of scripture. But what we also look at is, why did this marriage have a need for somebody coming in from the outside? Why is there a need in either party to not be satisfied within the relationship that needs for us to look for a partner outside of the relationship? So that's the real question we need to look at. So we cannot blame the partner who has a need to look outside of the relationship. We also need to look at the partner that's in the relationship that is not able to fulfill the needs of the partner. So let's be gentle on that. I've explained to you that the mother herself was the child that was incestuously, shall I say, abused. So going back to my own story, and then you don't find that intimacy with your new partner. There's a resentment in the partnership. So whatever small incidents then happen in the partnership create the resentment, and then that no, that should have happened with the father, then happens with the partner. So it gets quite complex.
It's very complex and entangled.
And very entangled, yes.
Yeah.
So if I look at my own, so my father had a illegitimate affair with my mother. So it is obvious that there was a difficulty between him and his wife at the time. When him and his wife were able to resolve their difficulties, and I believe that her, shall I say, her open-heartedness to her husband's child, which was me, actually allowed him to see his wife for who she was. And they were able to rebuild their relationship as there were 2 more children after me. So it may not have been the perfect relationship afterwards. It never would have been a perfect relationship afterwards, because there's always that break in the relationship. But the key is, when we have a difficulty in our relationship, we need to ask both of the parties in the relationship, what is the difficulty that is giving them the excuse to find a relationship outside of the marriage, if I may call it that.
Yeah. The excuse, or we can also phrase it somewhat differently, their inability to see each other anymore. Because when they look, they look away. They look in different directions.
Anymore. Yes.
Yeah.
And then
there's usually a cause around that as well.
And then I'm currently working with a couple, and both of them say the wounds that they have inflicted over at each other over the years feels like they can never build the bridge again. But it brings me back. The wounds start with the inner child. And isn't this where we need to start healing? The inner child that is growing up with parents who have their own wounds, generational wounds that affect that inner child.
The more and more we explore
our inner child vision.
Yeah. More and more we explore this work, I'm convinced that the inner child work is the door in. That's where we need to start. It's foundational.
Absolutely. Because the trauma that a child experiences and is not even aware of creates the foundation for behavior patterns in a partnership, relationship, and marriage. Wow. So now we need to find the bridge to heal the wounds.
Yes, yes. So that would be a lovely new next chapter of this narrative.
Yes. But what I'm hoping is for those who are brave enough to actually look and watch this discussion, to not be judgmental on any element, to not be judgmental on any human that is so broken that they need to break another. Because although it's a belief system in some families, my question is, where did that belief system come from and what happened?
Yeah. In the beginning,
the victim becomes the perpetrator, and the perpetrator then creates another victim. So we need to break this perpetrator-victim pattern.
Absolutely. Where did it originate? And it's very interesting that originally the family constellation systemic work was also referred to as family of origin. It's referring to where the patterns might have originated.
Absolutely. So what I love about systemic work is that we look at the brokenness, and we look at the brokenness that creates the shame, the brokenness that create entangled secrets. Once we untangle all those secrets, we untangle the brokenness as well, and we allow the healing to come through. I wish I had done this work in my 20s.
So, as you said earlier on, let's invite all those brave-hearted, courageous people to come on a journey with us in this next venture.
Absolutely. Thank you, Leon, for being so patient and helping me through this, for me, difficult subject. But I know I'm not the only one who deals with this difficult subject. There are many, many people out there, men and women, who have similar or even worse experiences. So thank you for staying with me through this difficult subject.
Thank you. Thank you.